The sun hung like a bleeding wound against the horizon as she, a female Homo habilis named Cassie, crouched behind the weathered acacia tree. Her calloused fingers gripped a crude stone axe with practiced precision, its sharp edge still stained with the blood of yesterday's hunt. The savanna stretched endlessly before her, a golden sea of grass that whispered secrets in the warm wind. But today, those whispers carried something different. Something wrong. Cassie's tribe had been tracking the wounded antelope for 3 days, following its erratic path through the thorn bush and across dried riverbeds. Food was scarce this season. The great drought had driven most prey animals north, leaving only the desperate and the dying behind. Her people were growing thin, their ribs showing through weathered skin like prison bars of bone. The scent of fear sweat mixed with the metallic tang of blood reached her nostrils. Not antelope blood, human blood. She moved forward cautiously, her bare feet silent on the sun-baked earth. The silence was unnatural here, where birdsong should have filled the air. Even the insects had gone quiet, as if the very land held its breath in anticipation of something terrible. Through the sparse vegetation, she glimpsed movement. 3 figures hunched over something in a small clearing, their backs turned to her hiding spot. At first, she assumed they were from her tribe, perhaps Django and his hunting party who had left at dawn. But as she drew closer, the copper taste of dread filled her mouth. These were strangers. Their skin bore unfamiliar scars, their hair twisted into patterns she didn't recognize. And what they were doing to the body before them. Cassie's stomach lurched. The corpse had been systematically dismembered, but not for food. The limbs were arranged in a perfect circle around the torso, each pointing toward the heart like accusatory fingers. The skull sat atop a small mound of stones, its empty sockets staring blindly at the merciless sky. One of the strangers looked up, and Cassie saw something in his eyes that chilled her blood. It wasn't hunger or desperation emotions she understood. It was ecstasy. Pure, terrible joy at the act of destruction they had just completed. The spirit's hunger, the stranger whispered to his companions, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. They demand more. Cassie's hand tightened on her axe as understanding crashed over her like a lightning strike. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was something new. Something that went beyond the natural order of predator and prey. This was worship through violence. As she began to back away, her foot snapped a dry twig. The sound echoed across the clearing like a gunshot. All 3 strangers turned toward her hiding place, their eyes gleaming with that same terrifying joy. Cassie's heart hammered against her ribs as she sprinted through the thorny undergrowth, branches tearing at her weathered skin like grasping claws. Behind her, she could hear them crashing through the brush, not running, but pursuing with the methodical patience of predators who knew their prey was already trapped. The acrid smoke of their ritual fire still clung to her nostrils, mixing with the copper scent of spilled blood and her own fear sweat. Every instinct screamed at her to find high ground, to put distance between herself and these ... things that wore human faces, but harbored something else entirely behind their eyes. She vaulted over a fallen log, her feet finding purchase on the loose shale beyond. The landscape here was treacherous, a maze of rocky outcroppings and deep crevices carved by ancient floods. One wrong step could mean a broken ankle, and a broken ankle meant death. "Little sister," a voice called from somewhere behind her, deceptively gentle. "Why do you run?" "We only wish to share our revelation with you." The words sent ice through her veins. She had seen their revelation. She had smelled the burned offerings, witnessed the careful arrangement of severed limbs, the ritualistic placement of organs around that grotesque altar of stone and bone. Cassie ducked into a narrow canyon, pressing her back against a cool rock face as she struggled to control her ragged breathing. The walls here were stained with ancient ochre paintings, handprints, and crude animal figures left by her ancestors generations ago. They seemed to watch her with hollow, accusing eyes. Footsteps echoed off the canyon walls, growing closer. Multiple sets, moving with coordinated precision that spoke of practiced hunts. These weren't desperate scavengers, driven mad by hunger. They were organized, purposeful, evolved. The spirits spoke to us in dreams. Another voice drifted down from above. One of them had climbed the canyon rim, cutting off her escape route. They showed us the true path, how weakness must be carved away, how strength comes only through sacred violence. Through a gap in the rock, Cassie glimpsed movement. They were surrounding the canyon, sealing every exit with the methodical care of experienced hunters. But they weren't hurrying. They had time. They wanted her to understand what was coming. Your people cling to the old ways. The first voice continued, now terrifyingly close. Sharing food, protecting the weak, showing mercy to prey. But the spirits have revealed a new covenant. Strength through sacrifice, unity through shared blood. Cassie's fingers traced the familiar weight of her stone axe. It had served her well in countless hunts, brought down antelope and warthog, defended her children from hyena packs. But against this new kind of predator, humans who had transcended mere survival to embrace something darker, she wondered if it would be enough. A shadow fell across the canyon entrance. She could see him now, the leader, his body painted with intricate patterns of dried blood and ochre. In his hands, he carried not just weapons, but trophies, finger bones strung like beads, teeth filed to sharp points, scarified flesh that told stories of ritualistic pain. "Join us willingly," he whispered, his voice echoing off the stone walls like a prayer, "and your death will birth something beautiful." But as Cassie prepared to make her final stand, a new sound reached her ears. Familiar voices, growing closer. Her tribe's war cries, carried on the desert wind like answered prayers. The hunt was about to become a battle. The war cries of Cassie's tribe reverberated through the canyon like thunder. But what emerged from the rocky maze wasn't salvation. It was something far more complex and terrifying. Django led the charge, his muscular frame painted with the ritual ochre of their people. But as Cassie watched him drive his spear through the first stranger's chest, she saw something new flickering in his eyes. The same terrible ecstasy she had witnessed in the canyon. The battle was swift and brutal. Cassie's people fought with the coordinated savagery of a pack defending their territory. But it wasn't mere defense driving them forward. As bodies fell and blood soaked into the parched earth, she watched her tribesman Kofi deliberately break his enemy's fingers one by one, savoring each crack of bone, each scream of agony. "Cassie!" Django's voice cut through the chaos as he pulled his spear free from the leader's twitching corpse. "Are you harmed?" She shook her head, unable to find words. The three strangers lay dead, their blood mingling with the ancient ochre stains on the canyon floor. But instead of relief, a cold dread was settling in her stomach. "Good," Django continued, his breathing heavy with exertion and something else. "These innovations they practiced, we must understand them." The word hung in the air like a curse. Innovations, not abominations. Not the twisted perversions of a sick mind. Innovations. As the sun reached its zenith, casting harsh shadows across the killing ground, Cassie watched her people methodically examine the strangers' weapons, their ritual scarifications, their carefully arranged altar of bone and flesh. What should have been horror was becoming curiosity. What should have been revulsion was transforming into fascination. "Look at this," whispered Esha, the tribe's eldest woman, as she traced the intricate patterns carved into the leader's skull. "They've marked the bone in ways that speak to the spirits. Their scars tell stories of willing sacrifice." "Willing sacrifice?" Cassie found her voice at last. "You saw what they did to that body. They tortured. They transcended," Django interrupted, his eyes never leaving the ritual implements scattered around the altar. "They moved beyond simple survival into something more. The tribe gathered in a circle around the grisly display, and Kessie felt the world shifting beneath her feet like sand in a windstorm. These were her people, the ones who had taught her to hunt and gather, to protect the young and honor the dead. But as she watched them handle the stranger's torture implements with growing reverence, she realized something fundamental had broken. The old ways, cooperation, protection of the weak, mercy for the defeated, suddenly seemed primitive. Childish, even. The strangers had shown them a new path, one where power came not from community, but from the willingness to inflict and endure exquisite pain. "We should burn the bodies," Kessie said desperately. "Return to the village. Forget this place." But Django was already lifting the leader's blood-stained skull, examining the deliberately shaped fractures with the intensity of a craftsman studying superior tools. "The spirits spoke to them," he murmured. "Gave them visions of strength through sacred suffering. Perhaps they were trying to share a gift." As evening shadows lengthened across the canyon, Kessie realized with growing horror that her people weren't planning to forget what they had seen. They were planning to perfect it. The first ritual would happen at moonrise. The full moon hung like a diseased eye over the tribal settlement, casting everything in sickly silver light. Kessie crouched at the edge of the circle, watching her people prepare for something that had no name in their ancient language. At the center of the gathering, Django held the stranger's skull aloft, its polished bone gleaming weightly in the firelight. Around him, 23 members of their tribe sat in perfect silence, their faces painted with ash and blood and patterns that seemed to writhe and shift in the dancing shadows. The old spirits demand only survival. Django's voice carried across the circle with hypnotic rhythm. Food, shelter, protection of our young. But the new spirits, ... They hunger for transformation. They want us to become more than mere animals scraping for existence. Cassie's stomach clenched as she recognized the bound figure at Django's feet, Moto, an elderly man from a neighboring tribe who had come seeking trade. His eyes were wide with terror, but also with a terrible understanding. He knew what was coming. "We were shown the path," Django continued, running his fingers along the ritual scars that had appeared on his arms since the canyon encounter. Self-inflicted marks that spoke of midnight sessions with sharpened flint and burning brands. Pain is the gateway. Suffering is the key that unlocks our true potential. Asha stepped forward, carrying a collection of tools that made Cassie's blood run cold. Not hunting implements, but instruments of deliberate agony-sharpened bones. Heated stones, thorns soaked in plant toxins that would prolong consciousness through unimaginable torment. "This is not who we are," Kessie whispered, but her words were lost in the collective intake of breath as the first cut was made. What followed would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. The systematic dismantling of a human being, performed not in rage or hunger, but with the careful reverence of a sacred rite. Each scream was treated as a prayer, each drop of spilled blood as a divine offering. But worse than the victim's suffering was the transformation she witnessed in her people. As the ritual progressed, their faces changed. The familiar expressions of her childhood companions melted away, replaced by something alien and rapturous. They were becoming something new, something that wore human skin but harbored hungers that went far beyond flesh. When it was over, when the last breath had rattled from Moto's tortured lungs, Django held up his hands, now stained with blood that seemed to glow in the moonlight. "Do you feel it?" he asked the circle. "The awakening? We are no longer merely human. We are the chosen instruments of transformation." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathering. Voices that had once sung lullabies to children now whispered of sacred violence and the necessity of pain. Hands that had once offered comfort now flexed with anticipation of future torments. Kessie found herself backing away from the circle, her heart hammering against her ribs. But as she turned to flee, she realized with dawning horror that escape was impossible. The ritual had changed more than just the participants. It had awakened something in the very air around them, a presence that pressed against her consciousness, like invisible fingers probing for weaknesses. Behind her, Django's voice rose in a chant that had never existed before tonight. Words in a language that seemed to bypass human hearing and speak directly to the primitive brainstem. And scattered throughout the settlement, she could see other fires beginning to burn, other circles forming, other transformations beginning. The contagion was spreading. By dawn, nothing would remain of the people she had once called family. Dawn broke over a settlement transformed into something unrecognizable. Where once cooking fires had sent homey smoke spiraling into the morning sky, now ritual braziers burned with flames that seemed to consume light rather than create it. The familiar sounds of children playing and women grinding grain had been replaced by a low, constant chanting that made Casey's teeth ache. She had spent the night hidden in the grain storage pit, watching through gaps in the woven cover as her people continued their transformations. What she witnessed defied every natural law she understood. Bodies that should have collapsed from exhaustion continued their frenzied dancing until the moment of sunrise. Wounds that should have bled freely sealed themselves with black scabs that pulsed like living things. Most disturbing of all, the participants seemed to be sharing thoughts, moving in perfect synchronization without spoken commands. Now, as pale morning light filtered through the acacia trees, Cassie emerged from hiding to find herself in a settlement of strangers wearing familiar faces. "Sister," a voice called softly from behind her. She turned to see Asha approaching, but this was not the wise elder who had taught her to weave baskets and identify medicinal plants. This Asha moved with predatory grace, her eyes holding depths that seemed to extend far beyond the confines of her skull. "You witnessed the awakening," Asha continued, her smile revealing teeth that had been filed to sharp points some time during the night. "Yet you chose not to participate." "Why?" Cassie gripped her stone axe tighter, though she knew it would be useless against what her people had become. "Because what you did, it was wrong. It was evil." "Evil?" Asha tilted her head with bird-like curiosity. "Is it evil for the eagle to hunt the rabbit? Is it evil for lightning to split the tree? We've simply claimed our place in the natural order as apex predators of consciousness itself." Around them, other tribe members were emerging from their dwellings, but they no longer moved as individuals. They flowed like water, like a single organism with multiple bodies, their synchronized movements creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. "The old ways taught us to preserve life," Cassie said desperately. "To protect the weak, to share resources, to remain animals." Django's voice cut through her words as he materialized from the shadows between two huts. His transformation was the most complete of all. His flesh now bore intricate scarification that seemed to shift and crawl across his skin, and his eyes held the cold intelligence of something that had never been entirely human. "We tried those methods for countless generations," he continued, circling her with fluid movements. "Cooperation, compassion, mercy. And what did it earn us? Stagnation. We remained trapped in the same cycles, fighting the same battles against hunger and predation, never evolving beyond our animal limitations." The circle of transformed tribe members tightened around Cassie, but she sensed they weren't preparing to attack. They were offering her something far more terrifying, a choice. "But the ritual hunger showed us a different path," Django whispered, close enough now that she could smell the metallic scent of dried blood on his breath. "Through sacred violence, through the willing embrace of pain and terror, consciousness itself can be transformed. We can become something that transcends the petty concerns of mere survival." As if responding to some unspoken signal, the circle began to chant in that impossible language that seemed to bypass her ears entirely. The sound created pressure inside her skull, and with growing horror, Cassie realized she could understand fragments of meaning. They were offering to make her perfect, to strip away every weakness, every doubt, every trace of the compassion that held her back from achieving her true potential. All she had to do was surrender to the hunger. "Choose quickly," Asha whispered, her voice now harmonizing with the others in ways that should have been impossible for human vocal cords. "The sun rises higher, and soon the window of transformation will close. Join us willingly, or ... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Cassie could see the alternative in their synchronized movements, in the ritual implements that had materialized in their hands while she wasn't looking. Either way, she would become part of their perfect, terrible unity. The chanting grew louder, and Cassie felt her grip on the stone axe beginning to weaken as something vast and patient pressed against the edges of her consciousness, promising an end to all uncertainty, all pain, all loneliness, all humanity. The pressure in Cassie's skull reached a crescendo as the chanting surrounded her like a living thing. But in that moment of ultimate crisis, something unexpected happened. The ancient ochre handprints on the canyon walls flashed through her memory, not as primitive decorations, but as desperate warnings left by ancestors who had faced this same choice. "No," she whispered, and the simple words seemed to create a crack in the air itself. The synchronized movements of her transformed tribe faltered for just an instant, and in that heartbeat of confusion, Cassie struck. Not with her stone axe, but with something more powerful, the memory of who they had been before the ritual hunger consumed them. "Django," she called out, her voice cutting through the unnatural harmonics of their chant. "Remember when we were children, when you shared your portion of honey with me during the famine? Remember Ash's lullabies, how they kept the nightmares away?" The scarifications on Django's flesh seemed to writhe with agitation as fragments of his former self flickered behind his transformed eyes. For a moment, just a moment, she saw confusion replace the terrible certainty that had consumed him. "Those were weaknesses," he replied, but his voice lacked its previous conviction. "Sentimentality that held us back from becoming monsters," Cassie finished. "From losing everything that made us worth preserving in the first place." She began to back toward the edge of the settlement, knowing she had perhaps seconds before their unity reasserted itself. But as she moved, she continued speaking not to convince them, for she understood now that they were beyond saving, but to plant seeds of doubt that might protect others. "You think you've evolved," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But look around you. You've destroyed the children's laughter, silenced the songs of the elders, turned the sharing of food into the sharing of agony. This isn't transcendence, it's extinction." The circle began to close again, but there was hesitation now. Microsecond delays in their movements as individual consciousnesses struggled against the collective hunger. It wouldn't last long, but it might be enough. Cassie turned and ran. Behind her, she heard the sound of their unity shattering like pottery, just for a moment, before reforming stronger than ever. But that moment of discord had created an opening, a crack in their perfect synchronization that she could exploit. She knew these lands better than anyone, had hunted every game trail and hiding spot since childhood. If she could reach the deep caves beyond the escarpment, the sacred places where her ancestors had performed their own rituals, not of transformation through pain, but of connection to the eternal cycle of life and death, she might find sanctuary. Or she might find answers. As she ran, dodging through familiar thornbush and leaping across dried creek beds, Cassie carried with her more than just the memory of what her people had been. She carried the knowledge of what they had become, and the terrible understanding that this transformation would spread. Other tribes would be curious about the source of her people's newfound unity and strength. They would ask questions, seek to understand the rituals that had created such perfect coordination. And in seeking those answers, they would find the hunger waiting for them. The plague of transformation would spread across the savannah like wildfire, consuming everything human in its path and leaving behind something that wore familiar faces but harbored alien hungers. By the time Cassie reached the safety of the deep caves, the sun was setting on what might be the last day of natural humanity. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin in earnest, not for food or territory, but for new consciousness to corrupt and perfect. In the darkness of the ancient sanctuary, surrounded by the true artwork of her ancestors, images of cooperation, protection, love, Cassie began to plan. If she was to be the last guardian of the old ways, she would need to be more than just a survivor. She would need to become something even more dangerous than what her people had transformed into. She would need to become hope. The ritual hunger had awakened something dark in the heart of human evolution. But perhaps, just perhaps, it had also awakened something else. Something that would fight back with weapons the hunger couldn't understand. Compassion, sacrifice, and the stubborn refusal to surrender what made them human in the first place. The war for the soul of humanity had begun, and it would echo through the millennia to come. Outside the cave, inhuman voices began to chant her name.